Welcome to Wealth Builders. I'm Gabriela Alcántara-Díaz, joined by my co-host Frank Carbajal. Today we're diving into the Latino Wealth Journey study, developed in collaboration with Morgan Stanley Institute for Inclusion, our agency SEMILLA Multicultural and Hispanic Executive. We sit down with Ileana Musa of Morgan Stanley to explore how Latino entrepreneurs are fueling multi-generational wealth. With 23% of respondents across wealth tiers in our study identifying as small business owners, we'll unpack the momentum and the barriers we still need to overcome to accelerate lasting success. Frank, why don't you kick off our conversation with Ileana?
Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon here in the U.S. and good evening in Europe and good afternoon in Mexico and South America. We have listeners across the globe. I want to say, Ileana, it's an honor to have you here today. And one of the things about Latino Wealth Builders and how we came up with this idea, we didn't come up with it individually, we together, inclusively as a community. And one thing that's important is we have you, Ileana, and we want to talk about your journey, your personal journey, and how it is that you got into this area of finance. Because when we speak of finance, we talk about wealth gaps and how we have unbanked communities and marginalized communities. But what we do know collectively is we have 60 million plus in the United States. But in terms of the power and the power, el poder, how could we collectively really move the needle? What are some things that you do in terms of your journey and bringing us together? And I'd like to mention before we get started is as the founder of the Silicon Valley Latino Leadership Summit, I have built a personal relationship with Morgan Stanley through the collaboration because they have been a sponsor and a supporter of the Silicon Valley for the past 14. With COVID, it would go on the 15th year, but every single year with a personal, a great leader and friend, a family friend, Angel Chavez has been there from the beginning and has been there to believe in the Silicon Valley, because here in the Silicon Valley is what I call an infrastructure divide. And what that means is if you've been to California, there's a freeway and Highway 101, which runs from LA across to San Francisco, and everything east of the 101 there is a divide. And what I call the divide is that gap, the financial gap, the venture capital gap, the investment gap. I want to paint that picture and that illustration for folks listening. And Ileana, you as an expert, what are some of the things that we could do as far as first hearing your journey to funding folks that are entrepreneurs that happen to be Latino and Latina?
Well, Frank, thank you so much. Gabby, it's great to be here with both of you. I love the title of the podcast. I think it activates us all to think about what we can actually do to change the trajectory, because to your point, Frank, it's all about the trajectory. And it's less about what your starting point is. That's always been my philosophy, but more about what are the steps you're taking consistently to move the dial to build multi-generational wealth. And my journey, just by way of background, I was not going to be in the finance world. I didn't grow up in a home where we discuss finances at the dinner table. I was raised by a single parent. I met my father when I was in high school. Both of my parents were entrepreneurs. My mother was a single mom of three, had, many odd jobs. My father also had his own business. And so what I learned from both of them is that it takes a lot of discipline and courage, but it can be done. And so I was going to be a dancer. I wasn't going to study finance. Dance was my first love. I then met my father. He convinced me to study finance. And that's how I entered this world and ended up in New York City on Wall Street. And I've had a 24-year career. And it's been an incredible journey. And so what I would share with all the listeners around the globe is there is a path for each and every one of you. I didn't have multi-generational wealth when I started. And so I think for many Latinos, you don't have that cushion to start off with. You're building it from the ground up. And I would say the pivotal point for us is to move from financial stability to financial independence. And there's a big difference there because we all spend a lot of time validating our success, especially as immigrants, whether we're starting off in a new country by ourselves or we're the next generation. And so you're having to spend a lot of time just making ends meet. And sometimes as an entrepreneur, when you're starting a business, that's a journey. You're investing everything that you're making into this business because it's all you have. in terms of the future. And so how do we move beyond that? That is the journey we're talking about here, which is how do you move from just stability to independence, which means giving you better choices. And there's different building blocks around that, Frank, that we need to all employ to be able to build that multi-generational wealth. And that's what I'm excited to talk to both of you about, because the study that Morgan Stanley underwrote in partnership with SEMILLA Multicultural and Guerrero Media gets to the core of what we heard from over 600 respondents, over 20 interviews that we did. It really speaks to how do Latinos think about this journey? And what I really appreciated from all the candid feedback we received is they want to learn, they want to do, and they are ready to take the reins in terms of owning their own financial journeys. And that was both for high net worth individuals, those that have over $500,000 to invest, and those that are emerging affluent, which have between $100,000 and $500,000. And so I want to share some learnings and some of the opportunities for your audience. Again, I spend a lot of time focusing on is there's a real need and there's a very strong desire by our community to do more, and now is our time.
And I think, Ileana, when working on this project with you, what I thought was so interesting is that when we think of the Hispanic market and how they want to build wealth, we knew that one of the anchors, one of the pillars is entrepreneurship. It's real estate, it's investing in the market. And the fact that almost 25% of the respondents were entrepreneurs, and for them, to your point, talking about financial independence, 70% of them see investing in the market as a way of financial independence. And it's so important. One of the things that Frank and I talked about is when we started with the podcast is oftentimes Hispanics, and you and I have had these conversations as well, is that, we work hard, but oftentimes we don't work smarter. And also we do not prevent calamities in terms of being more like preventive with medical, with financial. So long-term planning is so important. And one of the things that Frank and I talked about is how can we get our audience to understand that there's two parallel worlds, right? So as you're building a business, simultaneously, you have to understand how that business can build wealth for you. And you have to have a real, and that goes for corporate America and investing in the marketplace. Can you talk a little more about the concept of financial independence and how that plays a huge role in the Hispanic consumer space?
Sure. And so you're right. And it wasn't a surprise to us, right, Gabby, that almost a quarter of those who responded to the survey are entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurship is core to our community. Even for those like me, I work for a corporation in financial services, but entrepreneurship is very much part of my DNA in everything that I do. Right? We approach things, we have a startup mindset and the resilience to go after it and know that we have to invest ourselves in order to get stuff done. And we have to put in the work, even if whether it's our own business or somebody else's business that we work in. And so a couple of things that we've learned based on what we heard. Number one, to your point, there's a deep, deep responsibility that the community feels, inclusive of entrepreneurs, in terms of family and legacy. So when we think about wealth, or the term that we came up with is riqueza, which is so much more than just wealth accumulation. It means paying it forward and thinking about your extended family, and thinking about your children, those are coming behind. We heard from the responders that they want to make sure their children are better prepared than they were, because two of the characteristics of both emerging affluent and high net worth individuals was, what was my starting point? I didn't have a lot of resources. We heard that. But in the majority of the cases, they found a way to get started. Now, what are the key components that they found critical and believe we have an opportunity to do more of to continue to close those gaps? One is financial education. So how do we understand that we as individuals, because I firmly believe, Gabby and Frank, that it's up to us to take the reins and understand that we have a responsibility to become better educated. Part of that is, who are we working with? We heard that over 60% of the folks who responded were working with a financial advisor, somebody in their network that they were seeking advice from. But from the other 40+% that weren't, there's a high propensity to want to work with an advisor because they recognize that working with an expert helps them achieve success in a shorter period of time. And I would say this journey that we're on is all about shortcuts. It's learning from the best so we don't have to struggle to know, to have the roadmap on what to do. So financial education is key, and surrounding ourselves with individuals that have that experience is really important. Number two is the networks. We gathered, Gabby, as you know, a lot of insights about the power of the network, which is, hey, who am I? Am I operating in the circles that I need to be able to gain the insights, gain the knowledge, and the how to be able to achieve financial success? And I think as Latinos, we need to ask ourselves, how diverse are our networks? Are we having individuals that we collaborate with that think like us, that are in the same sector as we are, in the same communities that we are, or are we branching out and stretching ourselves and joining other circles and networks that help us gain some of the insights that we need? So networks, really important. Education is the other one. And that's why at Morgan Stanley, we feel that we have a very important role to play, because we can be that solution for everyone in whatever stage they are. If you want to do this on your own, some folks want to invest on their own, there's a platform and a solution for you. If you want to work with a professional that helps guide you, there's that solution for you. But the point is, we all need to get started. And then, Gabby, I want to go back to where you started, which is, as an entrepreneur, you're taking care of the business, but there's two roadmaps that you need. And these two worlds converge, which is, are you building the business for future success? And how are you planning your personal finances to make sure that at the end of that road, you've got both worlds covered? And there is a financial plan that can address both. And that's the opportunity ahead.
Well, that's excellent. One of the things about entrepreneurship is, we have trust issues, right? And the era of today is, for example, DEI is not only being scaled back, but it doesn't exist in many companies. The DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion. But what I've done is I've done some research on how has it helped the Latino community. And overall, what I've learned is the building of trust and relationships is what really is the epitome of how we thrive as a Latino community. What could you say about building trust and relationships as far as a starting point for an entrepreneur?
We also gained some insights in the study, Frank, regarding the importance of trust. And as you're building your network, who are the folks that you want to ultimately meet and be part of in terms of closing the gaps and being able to accelerate your path in terms of financial knowledge and financial independence? And one of the things that was very surprising is what we heard loud and clear is you want folks that culturally appreciate, right, the unique aspects of your financial situation, but you don't necessarily need to work with somebody that's Latino. And I thought that was great, because what the community is saying is, I want to learn from the best. And if the best is able to connect with me in a way that's culturally relevant, then I'm all in. And so there's this misconception, I find, that if you're a Latino client like I am, that I only want to work with Latinos, right? I think what we heard is people want to work with those who have the insights and the wherewithal to help them achieve the goal. And I think for entrepreneurs, it's the same thing. I recently attended a symposium on venture capital, and a lot of the conversation was, who is in your network and who are you seeking guidance from? And the first step in that process is to find the opportunities to connect with those individuals that you believe are going to help you grow. And sometimes that's a little bit uncomfortable, right? Sometimes it means that we're standing in rooms where we don't feel 100% comfortable because it's foreign to us, but you have to stretch yourself and you have to go for it. And once you do that, it works really, really well. Because I always say, if you're willing to lean in halfway, you are half of the way there. Others are going to meet you halfway. And that is the key to building relationships and building a network.
That's exciting. Could I just add real quick to that point? Yeah. Many years ago, I was very fortunate to be a published author in 2008, before the market crash. And there was two people that I was getting out of my comfort zone to ask to write the foreword for my first book, Building the Latino Future: Success Stories for the Next Generation. And the two people were Edward James Olmos, and then the second person was a non-Latino by the name of Ken Blanchard, who wrote The 1 Minute Manager, who's one of the top selling authors of all time, who's one of the top thought leaders in the 20th and 21st century. And an executive coach said, just approach Ken Blanchard, see what he says. A Caucasian man. And he said, yes. He wrote the first foreword. But Angel Chavez, who we know, said, Frank, that has built your credibility to really pitch to sponsors, because if this man who's non-Latino believes in the Latino community, then you're on to something. And guess what? It happened that way. That's how the Leadership Summit was formed. It was really getting out of my zone and really collaborating and partnering with a non-Latino who happened to be Ken Blanchard. And so I believe that 100%.
Yeah. And it's, it's just getting comfortable with getting outside of our comfort zone. But once you do it once, to your point, Frank, then it becomes so much easier. But I think in all the circles that we operate, whether it's professional in a corporate setting, whether it's an entrepreneur in a small business setting, when you're raising capital as an entrepreneur, the network and the circles that you operate is really important. But the first step is the choices and the decisions that you're going to make in terms of, do you go for it, like you just said? Because there was a pivotal moment for you where you could have decided, you know what, I'm going to go in this other direction instead of asking Ken. So kudos to you and congrats. That's a great, great story, but that's what it's about.
What it's about. It's like, expanding on this, I think about how getting out of your comfort zone just builds your confidence. And what we find is that oftentimes those folks that we may fear the most because we don't know them well enough, right? They're not within our circles, are the ones that end up being our biggest cheerleaders. They see things that we don't see in ourselves.
That's right.
I think it's such a powerful statement and experience because we mitigate these relationships because of fear. And even in the research, when we did the interviews, the live interviews, it was just so powerful when we had feedback. I remember there was a young Venezuelan and she studied engineering and she works here in Florida. And she was 17 when she came from Venezuela. She was now in her late 20s and she was working among mostly men that were non-Hispanic white men. And she learned so much from them. And they just, embraced her. And she was like their little princess, the jewel. And it just gave her so much more confidence. And I think that we talk about those networking relationships. One of the things that we did find in the research is that a lot of individuals need to understand that Hispanics, especially in the wealth sector, they're not necessarily looking to just have a relationship with another Hispanic, but they want to be acknowledged and they want to be respected. And that was very clear that in one of the interviews, an entrepreneur, he was basically rattled by how disrespectful an advisor was to him because of the fact that he was Hispanic. And to Frank's point about the whole DEI and venture capitalists, really, are we going to be able to give you money because maybe you're a Hispanic entrepreneur? So those kind of things really go on day in day. And I think those are also barriers that oftentimes communities of color do face. So how do they battle those barriers that are not because of them? It's just sort of, in this silo that they're placed in.
The point around the stories you just shared, I think in financial services, it's like that, right? Like when I entered Wall Street, I didn't see a lot of folks that looked like me. But again, the journey for me, and I always say, what does success look like? What are you playing for? And so it meant that I did have to get out of my comfort zone and sit around tables with folks that I had never met, that went to very different schools than I did, that grew up on Wall Street when I hadn't. But if you have the courage to lean in and just get to know people on a more personal level, which Frank, I think gets back to your point on trust. And that's sort of what has worked for me. I have made it a point to get to know people on a personal level, because I always say, once you do that, you find that you have more in common and that you can both play to win. It's the same thing around negotiation. Whenever I talk about it, it's not a win-lose, it's a win-win. So are you approaching it that way to know that it's not going to be perfect? You're going to trip, you're going to fall. But Gaby, if you talk to enough people in those circles, you're going to start to build that network of people that you do trust, of people who do appreciate, and of people who you have that connection with. And ultimately, that's who you're going to want to give your business to. right? Because you're going to want to give your business to people that you trust, and to your point, that understand not just you, but what's important to you and your family. And that's what we're, here at Morgan Stanley, that's what we're doing. We're going really deep with families and clients to understand what is their passion, what do they care about, not just for today, but for the future. What's a legacy they want to build? Because we talked about financial stability, financial independence, and from there comes legacy, which is, what do you want to do for that next generation that's coming behind you? Because now they're going to get a head start. And it's really cool to say, I want to align my wealth to the causes that I care about, and I want to bring my family along for them to have that right. But you do go through those experiences, Gabby, that are not perfect. The question I always say is, what do you do with that? Do you fail forward is what I call it. Do you use it as a way to propel yourself, to lean into the network that you do have, to the folks that do fuel you in a positive way so that you can continue to build on it, versus convincing yourself that it's not worth the squeeze. It is worth the squeeze.
That's perfect. And Ileana, we have a few minutes left, and I wanted to ask you this last question because it really is about future generations. And you mentioned multi-generational wealth, and with student loans and our Generation Z facing future student loans and debt, and familia is number one, and how we keep our future educated. How or what would you recommend to alleviate some of those stressors? What are some resources that we as families could connect some of these young students, to kind of alleviate that stress? What are some things that we could do?
Yeah, well, so look, mental health is so important now, right, Frank? I think we're so much more open now to talk about it and learn from it. And it's really important to focus. Sometimes we're driving so hard on the million things we have to do. We're not checking in, number one, and smelling the flowers, because there's good, right? We're always focused on what's the gap and what's the next thing I have to do. But there's also a lot of good and accomplishments. I always say celebrate the wins, even if they're really small. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're pushing to raise capital and you may not have hit the target raise, but you're on your way there, celebrate that, because it's those incremental milestones that get you to the finish line. So pausing and recognizing what you've accomplished is really important. Number two, spending time on yourself. I think as Latinos, we need to recognize that we need to take care of our health. We need to exercise, because a lot of times if we're not spending time on ourselves, we're not going to be in the A game when you go back at it day in and day out. And we take care of so many people, because it's not just us. It's not just our nuclear family. We're thinking about so many people. But the discipline around carving out and making sure that the top 3 things on that to-do list are the things that are going to enable you to keep going is really important. For me, it's tennis. For me, it's spending time with my daughter. What are the things that fuel you? And obviously family, because I think for all of us, spending time with family is really important. And then beyond that, there are a lot of resources. Here at the firm, we're promoting a lot of resources for employees to make sure that they're taking care of themselves. Wherever folks work, capitalize and take advantage of those resources. Sometimes people get worried, well, if I'm tapping the resource around mental health, does that mean that then it's going to be interpreted in this fashion or that way? And so I think we just need to be open, because it is a topic that's very relevant that applies to all. And then the other thing I wanted to share with you, Frank, because you did ask about, you mentioned the whole point on capital raising. And I'm super excited. At Morgan Stanley, we spend a lot of time. We have the Morgan Stanley Inclusive and Sustainable Ventures Lab. It used to be the Inclusive Ventures Lab, but basically we provide early stage innovators with access to capital and resources to help them develop and scale. And I think that's one of the things you talked about at the top of this conversation, which is, as entrepreneurs, how do we solve for that? And so it's a program that we have available, and the idea is to help them build networks, to help them source investments, and tap an ecosystem that exists for them to be able to scale at a faster pace than they would otherwise be able to do. And we need to do more of this. And so I'm incredibly proud that our company is investing, in these efforts. But I get your point. The last thing is, I just want folks to be energized around the future. We have an incredible opportunity. Over 60 million of us in this country making a real impact in the U.S. economy. And if you think about the wealth that we are creating as a cohort, not just current generation, but the next generation to come, that is real power. So do not underestimate, as I always say, the power of one, and what you as an individual can do by taking the right steps, We're here to support you. We're here to guide you as you deem, however you want to, access us, and we can post some of that information, Frank. But I just want folks to feel that the future is bright and that our time is now. Well, congratulations to both of you, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ileana. Thank you. This was amazing, and we appreciate it. And we have 1 minute. What's your favorite thing to do
Well,
aside
I
from
am
work?
yeah, so a lot of things, but I would say of late, tennis. I've become an avid tennis player. I'm a newbie, about 2.5 years in, but I have a huge passion for it.
Awesome. So everyone stay
Yeah.
active outside of work. Thank you all.